She goes, "Have you even read your Bible?" And I was like, "Oh, this is not going good."
Oh, no. Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 18, Rex's Legacy, Music of Grace, The Loaf, with guest Laura Varnadore. I'm her brother and host, Mark Cain. This one will be unique, more casual than usual. Laura is my older sister. We know each other well, and that familiarity will be evident in this interview, in its more relaxed and meandering style. I guess this is what happens when you know your guest so well, you each can complete each other's sentences. What is the UCA all about? Every day there are people struggling to find fellowship for the simple reason that they believe the one God described in the Bible is the Father, not the Trinity. You'd think that would not be terribly problematic. After all, that's a belief based on some pretty explicit scriptural language, right? But as it turns out, Christian tradition. Tradition has imposed the overformulated, complex, mysterious Trinity onto us as a requirement. A requirement. You aren't even Christian if you don't hold to the Trinity. Well, you're okay if you lived before the councils formulated it. In that magical pre-trinitarian age, you could, for example, believe that Jesus was the first of God's creation, a second divine being subordinate to the Father. You'd be okay, because modern scholarship would call you proto-trinitarian and give you a pass. Or you could be like the apostles in the book of Acts and simply not teach the Trinity at all. No, that wouldn't mean you weren't Trinitarian. It just means that you didn't realize that you didn't know that you weren't, but that you really were. Those guys get a pass too. But not now. No. Now you have to accept it, as put forth by the Catholic councils. So why do Unitarians end up struggling? Because the majority of Christianity does not tolerate dissent on this point. People like us are Satan worshippers for believing God is actually one. Explicit scripture. Rather than three persons in one essence. Speculation. Yeah, really. Check out Why I'm Not a Trinitarian, episode 15. The UCA is focused on one thing, that God is singular, and that Jesus is his human Messiah. Why so narrow? Because in the age of the internet, people everywhere from every background are realizing that this enforced Trinitarian language, that they barely understand, is not needed for salvation and is likely wrong. And they speak up. And then they get kicked out. Or they just walk away on their own, tired of singing those songs at church. You know, the songs which toggle indiscriminately between the Father and the Son, as though they're modalist. But of course they aren't modalist. That's a heresy. They're merely modalist in song only. MISO. The UCA is based on that one thing so that these people from every walk of life can easily join and find others. It's like a virtual homeless shelter for Christian, one God-believing, scriptural monotheists. Once they meet others, then fellowship forms. They discover this podcast. They find out about events and groups. They connect to people. They discover that we are many and that they are not alone. If you are a Unitarian Christian, perhaps like myself and my sister, and you have fellowship, maybe you feel led to help, to join and to be an extension of our efforts to connect the isolated and to encourage the rejected. To learn more, visit UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. So why would I be visiting with my older sister on behalf of this global UCA effort? It's because of the amazing impact of my dad, Rex Cain. He was born in 1938 and died in December of 2017 at 79 years old. He pastored in the Church of God General Conference for 50 years. His first wife, Grace, our mom, died in her 30s with a family of 3 children. We'll talk about her today, too. Dad remarried, and Sharon is now mom to all of us. I had been reminiscing on Dad's prolific writing capability, on how much and how often he wrote, and how he communicated with others all around the world. I recently wrote Mom and asked her about this, and she replied, Mark, Dad spent much of his time doing this remarkable work. He felt it was so important to encourage others as they faced life's trials, to acknowledge their letters to him, and to respond to many Bible and other questions he was asked. He had such a wonderful gift for doing this in his own quiet way, and it showed how much he cared for other people. Rex is greatly missed by me and many others. Love, Mom. The title of today's podcast, Rex's Legacy, Music of Grace, The Loaf, the series of short phrases, is a tribute to my dad, who wrote loving and informative emails to his family almost daily. Many years ago, I told him they would be even better if he made the subject line a summary about what was in the email, rather than mundane subjects like good morning and news. Now that we have thousands of emails from Dad spanning years, his subject protocol makes them so much easier to find, read, and enjoy. Today is a more personal and intimate conversation, and you get to listen in. My sister and I recount a bit of what it's like growing up in a pastor's home, filled with faith and love. Rex's impact is an example of what is possible, what one can do if one is willing to be patient, to look far into the future, and to play the long game. Laura, thank you very much for joining me on this podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Now, so people understand, you are my very long-time sister. I think you've been my sister since as far back as I can remember.
Yes.
What's unique about our family is we grew up in a biblical Unitarian fellowship of the denomination our whole entire life. But there's a lot of people in the Unitarian world who maybe just came to this late in life. It's just something that they found after many years of being a Christian. Whereas for us, it was just part of what we grew up. So I just want to talk about that. You got a head start on being in the family because you're a little bit older than I am. So where did it begin for you?
In Dixon, Illinois. I was born there when my dad and mother had been married about a year. For just a little trivia, I was born in the same hospital as Ronald Reagan.
Hey.
But yes, I've been with our Unitarian beliefs my whole life since day one. I was probably in church the very first Sunday after I was born. I can pretty much guarantee that, although I don't remember.
Yeah.
And so really my whole life, I don't even remember in high school being, a young adult, even meeting anyone or talking to anybody that had a different belief as me. Until I went to college and was really on my own, I thought that's all there was in the world.
Yeah. There was a decent-sized youth group at our church when you were going through your school days. Mm-hmm. So you had a circle of friends who they all agreed with you, and
yes,
you didn't have to have those kinds of conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So Dad was just finishing Bible college. You were born right then at the very beginning. He moved to Morse Mill, Missouri, and that was his very first pastoral ministry. So you don't remember the time at Morse Mill because you were way too young at that point. But his next pastoral ministry was in Bedford, Ohio. Mm-hmm. And that, I believe, you were pretty much old enough to start remembering things. That's when our next sibling was born.
Yes, Alan was born when we lived in Bedford. And I can actually still remember kindergarten. That's about as far back as I can remember.
Yeah, and in Dad's notes, he said he was there for 5 years. So you got through a few years of school. Alan was born, and then he moved again. This is common in our denomination, the Church of God General Conference, that pastors will go from church to church. Pastors just basically put out the resume and talk to churches, and churches decide to hire them on. So yes. Dad was doing that process. And then after Bedford, he moved to Dayton, Ohio, which was where I was born. And then we were a whole family of three kids. Mm-hmm. And then he moves to Macomb, Illinois, and he's a pastor there. And then
that's when Mom died, like a year or so after we moved to Macomb. Mm-hmm. I remember her walking you to kindergarten crying, walked you down the alleyway when we lived in the old parsonage. Mm-hmm. And I remember walking with her the first day we went to school, and she walked to the end of the alley and watched you walk down to the school. And I remember her crying. I'm like, "Are you crying, Mom?" She's like, "No." At the time, it didn't register with me, but as an adult, I realized that when she was crying that day, she knew that she was not going to watch you grow up, that she wasn't going to be there.
Yeah.
And as a mom, that made me sad.
Yeah. Yeah. She had cancer for several years, several different treatments over the years, and it was not getting better. And so it's true. She did not expect to see me grow up. And of course, I'm just a kid and I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
But she knew that. And that was, I know, very stressful for her and hard. But I think she poured out a little extra love on me at the time.
Yeah, what do Alan and I say to you? We used to tell you that you were adopted because you were smart and skinny, and Alan and I are average and fat. So we said God knew that you were not going to have her and grow up with her, so he gave you a little extra something. So you are our nerd brother who's very smart and very gifted at many, many things. Yep.
Well, I think our whole family has been blessed. Grace, our mom, was a singer, and she was really good. And her musical interest and abilities was passed down to all of us. I think that's one of the reasons why when we get together, all 30 of us at a Thanksgiving, the music that we sing for our prayer is beautiful. There's harmonies.
We sound like a choir. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave some of that to you because we've sang together.
Mm-hmm.
And the creative aspect too. I love being creative. And I look at some of the cakes that you make and the hand skill that you make them with. That's part of what they gave us, was a creative, tactile sense of enjoying and making things cool in the world. So we got something from them.
Yes.
Even though she couldn't be around to see it all transpire.
Yes, we did. Yes, we did.
One day we'll have to recount all these wonderful stories of our adulthood to them in the kingdom, what they missed. I'll have to try to keep a copy of all these podcast episodes for Dad because...
I know.
Yeah, he never got to hear me do this, which is funny because...
He would be very proud of you. He always was proud of you, but he would love your podcasts for sure.
Yeah,
he would love them.
He's one of the reasons that I got interested in audio in the first place. Dad was recording on reel-to-reel tapes his life back before you were born. I actually was just listening to these the other day. I heard you cooing as a baby. I'll have to give you some of that audio.
Oh, wow.
I heard you practicing your clarinet.
Oh, my gosh.
And Grace telling you were in the wrong key. So
I was a nerd too. I was a band geek. Yep.
Yes. Yep. You and me.
Mm-hmm.
But Dad was recording his life all through the years, different events. He even has himself describing JFK's assassination. He stops and just records the live news feed off the TV, and you can hear him commenting on it. It's fascinating. He was very much an audio geek too. He had his box of cords and plugs and his cassette tapes. He would record all of his sermons. Remember WKAI in Macomb?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Every Sunday morning, we'd be getting ready for church, and we could turn on the radio, and he would have a 15-minute segment where he was doing a Bible lesson.
That's right. I had forgotten about that. Wow. Yeah.
So Dad was on radio before I was on radio. It is sad that he didn't get to see this finally work for me, where I finally got to do a radio, it's actually a podcast, but, because when I was partway through Bible college, I thought I would be a pastor too. And I decided, I don't think pastoring is for me. I really wanted to have a talk show. Mm-hmm. And so I moved back in with Mom and Dad and attended a radio school and actually got a job in a radio station.
I remember.
And, they were so supportive of me. I was making minimum wage, only 5 hours a night. And Dad never said anything like, this is going to be bad for you, son. He never did.
Yeah.
They were so good about it. But, it didn't happen. I ended up going into computers because I actually needed to earn money to feed a family. And it was only just in the last year that I was able to start something that was part of my original passion. But it's Dad's fault.
Well, you're killing it, bro. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's fun listening to Dad talk.
It is.
On audio. Yeah.
I miss him. I can't wait to see him again.
Yes, me too. Maybe we talk a little bit about what it's like growing up as a pastor's kid in as nice a way as we can.
How you feel about it might be different than what I felt. I don't know if we've ever talked about that.
Well, being a pastor, especially, let's back up a little bit. This will be interesting. Dad did not have a religious upbringing.
Yeah.
Dad grew up in a very difficult home, very broken home, and religion and faith and these things kind of came to him as a serious matter only when he went off to the Bible college. I think Dad had a lot of nerves about being a pastor early on in his life, and I believe that probably impacted how he was as a parent in the earlier years. growing up as a pastor's kid, there were moments that it was hard, and maybe you could describe a little bit about what that's like.
I had a wonderful childhood, parents who loved me. It was great. Only when I probably got into middle, high school years is when it was a little harder, just because people knew I was a pastor's child, and they would call me PK, PK, PK. Oh, don't say that around Laura because she's a PK.
Yeah.
I didn't make friends very easy. I had some close friends, but Dad was very protective of me, not so much as they went on, as you can probably attest. And I was the girl, and I was the oldest. I couldn't go to dances, and my mom would make my clothes, which was wonderful. But when it came time to hem the skirts, I had to get on my knees, and they would measure up 2 inches, and that was it. And that's where the hem went. So, everybody else at school was wearing them a little bit shorter, and I would always feel frumpy. It upset me that I couldn't look like everybody else at school sometimes. I remember that, but never made me not want them to be my parents, And I've turned out perfectly fine, and I'm a very decent human being and, maybe an asset to society. So I thank my parents for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that Dad felt a lot of pressure to be a good pastor and to do well. I think this might be a good time to play that little clip of him explaining the path that he wanted to take for his family.
Okay.
I think it's based a lot on my early childhood, because I did have parents, but they argued and fought a lot in tender years of my life, like beginning about 5 years of age, and then they divorced when I was 11 years old. And so it was in my mind that I was not going to live like that. And yet I wasn't a Christian, you could say, at that time. But I did go to church, and I guess I knew right from wrong. But I said, this is no way to live life with your wife and your children. And I was traumatized by a lot of things that happened in my life. So that was one thing. I said, I'm going to be a faithful husband, I'm going to have children and raise them the right way.
Yeah.
We had a lot of time to talk about things over the years, and I remember him explaining that it was hard as a parent and hard being a pastor. When you hear him talk about his childhood and the fact that he didn't have any real good examples and a lot of insecurities based upon that childhood, and now he was helping lead a church, I think he felt a lot of pressure to look the part, to do the right things, to not be seen going the wrong places, to not be seen saying the wrong things, doing the wrong things.
Or not having his children do the wrong things. Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. So your skirt length wasn't just, I think that's the right skirt length. I think there was a little bit of pressure from the congregation, or at least what he perceived as pressure. I want to make sure my family is in order. And there isn't anything wrong with wanting your family in order, but if it manifests as stress and fear about being judged, I don't think that's as healthy.
Yeah.
And I think as the years went on, he relaxed and saw that it was actually working.
Yeah.
He had a good family, and he didn't have to be quite so nervous about it.
I wish I could have known that as a child. I would have tried to been better. Bless his heart. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
He was a great dad. He very gentle spirit, very caring. He spanked me because back then that was okay, and I needed it, believe me. But he only one time ever in anger was forceful with me, and he actually just grabbed my shoulders and pushed me against the wall. We were standing in the entryway, and I deserved that, trust me. He told me not to do something, and I couldn't have the car, so I walked. It was my boyfriend's house. He told me I couldn't go. And the hour and 20 minutes it took me to walk there was a different world then, by the way. While I was walking, he called them and said, under no circumstances are you to drive her home. And so I had to walk back home. And when I got home, he was waiting. And I don't think he would have been angry with me, if I had just been pleasant with him. But I was a teenager, and so I said something flip to him about him making me walk home. And he just for a second lost it and shoved me against the wall. And I was like in shock because he had never, ever been that way with me. And I ran up the stairs crying, and he immediately came in there and he was crying. And so we had this little tender moment of, I'm sorry. I said, I'm sorry. And it never, ever happened again, ever. just very, very loving, very gentle. And I know he worked hard because he didn't want his kids to ever feel the way he felt as a child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So through the years, he had you, then he had Alan, my older brother, myself. And then our mother died of cancer when I was 6 years old. And you were how old?
I was 16, and Alan would have been 14.
Yeah. That was Grace Cain. He met her in college. At the time it was Oregon Bible College. It's now called Atlanta Bible College. They met there and they got married. So just because we can, and I think there are a few people who might actually know my family who listen to this, what if we play just a few moments of Mom singing?
Oh, that'd be great.
She had a really great voice, and I appreciate so much the musical sense that she gave us. We heard her singing around the house. We heard her singing all the time at church. Music was a part of our childhood.
Yes, she was sing to us in the car when we were on trips all the time. The little dog under the wagon. And
Yes.
Yes. And I wish I could sing half that good. I remember Dad telling me once that when she was in high school, there was people that told her that she should go into the music business and actually be a recording artist, gospel music, whatever. But she did not feel that calling. She felt God told her that she needed to stay home, go to school. She wanted to be married and have a family, and she wanted her voice to serve for the Lord. And she sang all the time.
Oh.
Even when she was very sick and dying, she was still going to churches and singing and sharing her testimony of faith.
Yeah.
She was an amazing woman. Very hard woman to follow in the footsteps of, I might add. Yep. Yeah. I would have loved to have got to have her in my adult life. That would have been pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Laura, you were 16 years old is not a good time to lose your mother.
No. And I kind of took over some of the mothering aspects of the household. I had to make sure you guys had lunches. We all had a lunch, and I did a lot of the laundry, and I did the best I could because I was still in high school, of course, too. And everything I did was just to take more off of Dad because he was so unhappy and sad, and I just wanted him to be happy.
Yeah.
So I did what I could, and it was a very hard time because I hated seeing him like that, and I couldn't fix it.
Oh, yeah. And I was so young, so much of that went past me. It was hard to grasp entirely what was going on.
Right.
But I knew Dad was not happy. When a year later he met Sharon, I knew he was happy again, and he got remarried. Everything in the home changed once again. It was like the sun had come back up again.
Mm-hmm.
She was glad to be there. We loved her, and it was like a new life for our family.
Right. And my teenage friends, of course, I was in high school then, were like, aren't you upset that your dad's dating another woman? And I'm like, no, because my dad's happy again, and there's light in his eyes. Of course, it helps that she's like the most wonderful woman that God just gave her to him at that time.
Yeah.
It was all his plan for sure. Yep.
Yeah. She thought she wasn't going to meet anybody.
Mm-hmm.
She was in her 30s at the time and figured, I guess I'll just be alone. There will be nobody. And then she met Dad, and, well, that's a whole story, but that's really not the story of this podcast.
Yeah.
But they clicked very well, and we've loved her ever since.
She's been amazing.
Yeah. And they had 2 more kids again. Mm-hmm. So now we have 5 siblings and 2 mothers. And what's really cool, thinking back to what Dad said about his vision, his hope for his family, he has successfully raised 5 kids who have all had their own families and who are all still part of the church. And when I say the church, for us, it's the Church of God General Conference. But in the broader scheme, they're all part of a Unitarian faith. I think back, he was alone, mostly alone as a child. He ends up in a family, just him starting off pastoring, hardly having any experience with that, and turning it into 5 kids and then their families, and it has spread.
And his grandchildren now have had grandchildren who are in church and learning these same teachings.
Yeah.
Even now. Yep.
I have one of the friends that I've met through the UCA feels extremely isolated. He described his family as like having church on the beach, just him, his wife, and kids, because he feels like there's nobody who he can relate to. And I explained my family, and he was amazed. Like, it really does happen. And in Dad's case, he was very deliberately intent on making a family better than what it was that he grew up with, and he succeeded in that.
Yes, he did.
And now, what do we got? 30?
There's like 38 if we all got together, which is hard to do now. It's a lot of people to get in one place at one time.
Yeah. And I think almost to the very last one of them, we're all part of the same church.
Yes.
And we all believe the same way, and we all get together at Thanksgiving, and we have peace and love and joy. I mean, we have some wonderful Thanksgivings.
And it's very interesting that the siblings and their children have brought in other spouses that were not raised in a Christian home or were not believers. And now they have actually seen our family. Even my husband is like, I've never seen a family behave that way. The first time he was with us, he goes, y'all act like you like each other. I said, we do. You know, and his family's a little dysfunctional, and sometimes they have arguments and they just let it go, you know, at family gatherings. And, you know, bringing people into our family by marriage has even made it bigger.
Yeah.
You know, so thank you, Dad.
I think he and Grace, and then he and Sharon set a very good example for being very serious about your faith with your family. And it has trickled down through everybody. And this is interesting. His oldest son, Alan, he's a pastor at one of our churches. The youngest, Dan, he is a pastor at another church. And I almost became a pastor. Instead, I guess now I'm a podcaster.
It's all right.
It's all right, yeah.
Alan's sons are pastors, or they're interning right now, both of them.
Yeah.
His son-in-law is a pastor, Jake.
And our younger sister, Sarah, her family's involved with ministry through the Korean extension at the Bible College. Everybody is still participating in faith. I think about these folks who feel like, well, I am just alone. It's just me. And I'm like, well, there was a time when it was just Dad and his wife.
And there was a time it was just Dad.
Yeah. He was an only child, and an only child in an abusive, broken home. Yeah. And now 50 years of his ministry, 30 plus showing up at Thanksgivings, singing together around for the prayer with harmony and music is just...
And all holding hands.
Yeah. It's a beautiful thing. So I just want people to know that it is in fact possible. Sometimes it's just a long path. But, you know, he died knowing that he had...
accomplished what he wanted to, yes.
Yes, he had done it. And it's a beautiful testimony. And I wanted to talk about that with you because that's the legacy that he left. And you and I are just byproducts of that.
Yes.
We've taken very different routes. And we've had a lot of fun events and a lot of fun stories. You, tell us about what you actually do, because it's interesting.
Is it?
What's the short version?
Okay. I work for a company. They manufacture buttercream icings, donut fillings, donut glazes for retail grocers and businesses all over the United States, like Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks. So I'm actually a cake decorator.
Yeah.
And so I travel pretty much wherever they send me. I've been as far as Canada. I work with our customers who are new to our products, or if they have decorators that need to learn different techniques, and I just go and train decorators. That's what I do. I travel.
Yeah. And the reason you're a trainer is because, well, I've seen your cakes. They're very good.
I do all right.
No, you do really good.
And just as a side note, Mark, you and Karen's cake was the very first wedding cake I ever did. And how many years you been married?
This will be our 27th year.
So I look at pictures of it now, I'm like, oh, that was bad.
If you ask Karen about that day, everything about it was wonderful.
Yeah, it was a great
she
day.
She loves it. So you, in your years then, as a cake decorator, you've moved around a lot of places and you've had a lot of experiences.
So in my travels, I work with numerous women of all, ways of life and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as an adult, I have really learned to appreciate my family, the way I was raised, the values I was taught. I see so much brokenness in this world that I'm out in. And women who are my age raising their grandchildren because the children they raised just can't do it. I have grandchildren. I have 6. And so I can't imagine raising them at this stage in my life right now. So I always feel bad. And I always, at night, I'll thank God for the family I have and for the way I was raised. So I don't take it for granted. I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You've ended up moving several places over the years. And every time you go someplace, what do you do then? You're in a new location and now you presumably want to find some fellowship.
Yes. So my husband is active duty Army. He's been in 10 years. So in those 10 years, we've moved 4 times. Each time, we visited some churches. Never have found one that is of the belief that I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, luckily, we are living only 2 hours from our home church in South Carolina. So now we have the lovely thing of getting to drive and go actually to worship with like believers, which is wonderful. But over the years when we didn't have that, we basically didn't go. There was one church here in North Carolina that we do visit. And we're still involved with their Sunday school class there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's been a few issues even there. Like they have an amazing worship team. So they sent out an email and it said, on these certain days, we're doing tryouts. And I know I could make it on there, but they sing a lot of praise and worship music that says God, Jesus, the 3 in 1, blah, blah. And I know there's going to be a mic like this right up to my mouth and they're going to hear me change the words because I do it even when I'm in the service. But they can't hear me in the audience, but I'm pretty sure they would hear it through the microphone up on stage. So it was just kind of made me sad because I really wanted to do that. And it's a way to serve, but I just wasn't comfortable doing it. So it is what it is.
But with a church then that's 2 hours away, how often do you go?
Every other weekend we go.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So we just get up and leave at 7:30 and get there just in time for worship. Our 3 kids live there, so we have lunch together, and then we drive back home.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Well, there's a lot of folks that once they joined up to the UCA, they don't find people close by. But as you've pointed out, twice a month, taking the time to make a drive is a blessing. It's worth it. It can be.
So it's a day we take a book in the car, we read to each other while we're driving. And we enjoy being together. It gives us a lot of time to talk on the ride. And then we get to worship with people of like faith, and it's very worth it to us. Now, we used to live in Kansas once, and that's about a 2-day drive. So you can't really do that in Kansas.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
No, we're not. Nope.
So in all of your travels and church experiences, have you ever had, this is the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, of course, so we like to think about things from that perspective, living as a Unitarian Christian in a Trinitarian world. Mm-hmm. Any stories or events that took place that you might remember that would...
Yes, indeed. We are in North Carolina right now, and we have been attending a church here. The first Sunday we went, you fill out the form, your name, and why, if this is your first time, if you have any religious background, they ask you all that stuff. It was a pretty big church. They have 2 services. It wasn't a mega church, but it was pretty good size. Mm-hmm. Then they have a little room in the back where you go back after church and they shake your hand and talk to you. So I remember they passed the card around and Shane leaned over and he's like, should we fill that out? Because they're going to call us or something. And he's like, I'm like, yeah, I said, I kind of like it. I think it'll be all right. So I filled it out and
okay.
Sure enough, about a week and a half later, I'm unpacking because we had just moved there.
Yeah.
And I hear a knock at the door. I look through the peephole and it's an older lady with a loaf of bread. And she looked pretty harmless, so I opened the door. We were living in an apartment complex then. So she told me she was with the church and that they were just welcoming us, which was really nice. She said, we bake this bread and we just take it to all the new people that come just to welcome you. I said, well, come in. So I invited her in. We didn't sit down, but she walked in. And she just asked me, how we like the service. Which service did we go to? Did we go to the traditional? Did we go to the contemporary? We had gone to the contemporary. So I told her I really enjoyed the music, the pastor, the sermon was engaging. It was, I really learned something. I enjoyed it. She goes, I know we give you, when you come in, a statement of our faith. Did you get to read any of that information? I said, I did. And I knew where this was going. And I was like, yes, I read it. She said, well, do you have any questions or any comments about the service or anything that you read in the materials? And I debated just briefly whether to say yes or no. And I said, no, I don't have any questions. She said, well, do you think you'll come back? And I'm like, yeah, I will. So she's getting ready to leave. She goes, you sure you don't, she goes, you look like you have something on your mind.
Oh, no.
And I was debating in this moment. I only had a few moments to decide if I was going to go there or not. So I decided I was trying not to make a big deal, so I just tried to word it a little better. So all I said was, there's just a few doctrinal things that I don't actually agree with, but I don't believe it's anything that would keep me from coming to your church. It's just, because we're out of town, we're just trying to find a place to worship. And she was like, what? And I'm like, I'm not sure this is the place maybe to discuss that. And I'm wondering if she's like the elder's wife. I don't know who she is. I've never met her,
Oh, yeah. Right.
And I said, it's probably, maybe we need to come a few more times and we can discuss it later if you want or something. She goes, no, really, tell me, what is it? And she was like begging me to tell her. I'm like, okay, here we go, God. Hope this goes well. I said, well, I just, you believe in the Trinity and I don't. There's like this look on her face and then there's this big long pause and she's like, you don't believe God and Jesus are one? I'm like, no. I just said no. I mean, what am I supposed to say? No, I don't.
Okay, yeah.
She said, what do you believe? I just said, I believe God is the creator of everything, the Father, and Jesus is his Son. And I believe the Holy Spirit is the power working in his people. And she immediately, just like a snap of the finger, went off. She goes, have you even read your Bible? And I was like, oh, this is not going good.
Oh, no.
And now she's in my house, I'm like, it's not like I can just shut the door,
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, actually, I have read my Bible, ma'am. And I was trying to be very calm, and I can feel my ears starting to get hot because I can't believe she's doing this, We had a little bit of a discussion about different versions of the Bible, like how the newer translations are, in my opinion, they're a little willy-nilly. That was the phrase I used. They're just, whoever did that translation just puts in what they basically believe and make it easier for people to understand. Well, human beings wrote whatever version you read too. That was one of her lines. I'm like, okay.
Okay.
Okay, we're not going to escalate this any farther. I said, ma'am, I really appreciate you coming, and I'm not going to change your mind, and you're not going to change mine. So it's really, we really don't need to continue this conversation, I don't believe. And then she just kept going.
Oh, no.
And opened her Bible and started pointing out passages. I can't even tell you what they were right now.
Yeah.
And so finally I said, so why when Jesus was about to die on the cross, he prayed to his Father, take this cup from me if it be your will. If he was in fact God, why would he pray to himself when he knew that's what he was going to do anyway, if it was God actually dying on the cross? And she had nothing to say. I said, I think we're done. And I will be back to your church. And I'm thinking in my head, I am not going to let this woman who's not really handling this very well keep me from going to a church and worshiping, So, and we have gone back. And I never have seen her. I look for her every time I go, but I never have seen her again. I've never had a discussion like that.
Yeah.
She just snapped. And her neck was red. And she was ready to come at me. She was very upset. Very.
Wow.
So it was an interesting day.
Yeah. Well, I suspect if she was talking to anybody else and they were questioning, well, I don't know if there's a God, or, I'm kind of agnostic, or, I don't know what I believe. She would probably see it as a mission opportunity to show the love of Christ to them.
Yes.
But you did the no-no, Laura. You did not agree with the Trinity.
FYI, she asked for it. She kept on wanting to know what I wanted to say. I didn't want to say it. I didn't want to start that, but she was very insistent that I tell her what I didn't agree with. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Some of the previous interviews that I've done, there's a special category of vitriol that is nurtured in people. I don't know why it has to be nurtured, why we have to treat people so poorly because they disagree with a theory. But man, some people really have. It's like a flip a switch. Something is really bad when you've violated that thing.
Yeah. She just wasn't the one that you could have that kind of discussion with. She was not going to do a little give and take with me at all. It was her way or no way, and she was very upset. So, yeah, it wasn't going to end well.
Did she take the bread back?
No, we ate that bread.
Was it good?
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Oh, goodness. Well, I really appreciate that you spent some time talking with me today.
It was fun.
Yeah. It is unique that we have a family that has been Unitarians our whole life. It's just natural to us.
Yes.
And I wanted to let people see into that, get a little window, if you might.
Yes, and I will admit I haven't listened to all of your podcasts, Mark, but I have listened to some, and it's really given me even more of an appreciation for the way I was raised and what a blessing it was to have that all my life.
Yeah, always be grateful.
Yes.
All right, Laura, thank you very much. I appreciate it so much. Love you.
Love you too, Mark. Bye-bye.
Bye. This episode is particularly special to me. I hope it was meaningful and helpful to you as well. I think the most important point here is that you have the capacity to influence your world up close in your small circle. You have the most influence on yourself. You can decide to pray more, get out more, rest more, eat less cream-filled pastries. No one else has as direct of impact on your daily life as you. Next to that, it's your family and closest friends, the people you spend time with daily. For my dad, it was us. This is where you impact others the most. Never underestimate your role. You may have a small circle, but it's still your circle. Let God's love work in you so you can work on those in your life. After that, your influence will diminish, so start small. It's the long game. For my dad, it was decades of persistent love and dedication before we finally had large gatherings together. But it happened. And Dad's quiet and unassuming love for others has now been replicated over and over through his family and through the others his life touched. If you're still puzzled by what this UCA thing is or what this podcast is about, may I suggest going all the way back to episode 1, The Perilous Trinity Deep Dive. As you listen to it and the other episodes, you'll see what we're doing here. You'll meet people who paid a price for their love of truth, but would do it all over again. It is a unique effort, and it's working. Membership is steadily growing. There are, as of March 2021, Unitarian Christians represented here from 35 different countries. And honestly, it still feels like we're just getting started.
Hello, Mark. This is your brother, Alan. Really enjoying these broadcasts. And you're doing a fantastic job. And as Mom always said, of all her kids, you have the face for radio. Keep up the good work.
Follow us on Twitter at UCA Podcast. On Instagram, you can get great moments from these podcasts, short quotes, uca.podcast. Go to the podcast page, podcast.unitarianchristianalliance.org, and click the record button so you can leave a pleasant voice message that I can share in future episodes. Unless your name is Alan from Ohio, your privileges have been revoked. On the podcast page is also the sign-up for the UCA Podcast email list. I write a little bit extra about each episode, personal thoughts, etc., and I include a large version of the custom episode art for those who like visuals. Laura, that was so fun. I laughed a lot as I edited this, and my wife will attest to that. I'm so thankful for you and the rest of our family. I pray that this brief, shared moment between you and I will be an encouragement to others. And here's how we're going to end, winding the clock back to 1971. Dad, if you would please introduce our performers today.
At this time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a song entitled Pass It On by Mrs. Grace Cain and Miss Laura Cain.
I wish for you, my friend, this happiness that I found. You can depend on Him. It matters not where you're found. I'll shout it from the mountain top. I want my world to know the Lord of love has come to me. I want to pass it on.
Thank you. Mark finally interrupted right at the end of the song. Did you interrupt on this May 21st of 1971?
He's crying because he's got a wet diaper.
Oh, that's so cool. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.
Did you want to say anything else, Mark?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Dad.